The manifest was a single sheet of paper, and I handed it to her myself. That is the part I have to live with. Not the colonel's decision, he outranked us all and he made the call he made, but the fact that I was the one who walked it across the room and set it on the table in front of her while her unit watched. Supply requisition, fuel allocation, ammunition counts. 12 lines of numbers that said, without saying it, you are no longer what you were. Her name was Staff Sergeant Raina Calvert, and for 7 months she had been the forward TACP on the northern axis of the Kale Valley operation. Joint Terminal Attack Controller. The woman who put steel on target, who deconflicted airspace over a firefight while the ground was moving under her. She had a record from the Darrow Ridge engagement, 14 air assets coordinated in a single 9-minute window, 340 Marines extracted alive, that I did not know about when I handed her that manifest. That record had a call sign attached to it. I did not know that either. I would learn both on the worst afternoon of my career. Colonel Vess had made his decision that morning in the mission brief in front of the 6 men she had served beside since February. He did not shout it. He was not that kind of man. He simply looked at the board, looked at her name on the TACP slot and said that the forward position wasn't suited for a woman and that he was restructuring the assignment. He said it the way a man says the weather is changing, a plain fact, a settled thing. Then he moved to the next slide. She did not argue. She sat with her hands flat on the table and she looked at the board and she said nothing. I watched her face for a break in it and there was none. When the brief ended and the room filed out, she stayed in her seat until everyone was gone. That was when I came in with the manifest. I set it down. I said, "Sergeant, the colonel wants you on supply coord starting this afternoon." She looked at the paper. Then she looked at me. She said, "Yes, Sergeant Major." That was all. I walked back out and I have thought about that hallway every day since. She worked the manifest for 11 days. She was precise about it. She filed every allocation correctly, flagged 3 discrepancies in the fuel accounts that 2 other NCOs had missed, and she did not complain to anyone about anything. I watched her because I felt the weight of what I had done, and watching her was the only thing I could think to do about it. She ran her assigned work the same way I imagined she ran an air coordination net, methodically, without wasted motion, as if the work itself was the only thing in the room. On the 12th day, the net went down. It came through the radio at 1403. Fob Crest, 8 kilometers north, had a burning LZ, 4 aircraft inbound on 2 frequencies, and 47 Marines pinned in a kill zone while a medevac tried to thread a corridor through active contact. Their JTAC Staff Sergeant Hollins, a good man, 7 months in country, had taken shrapnel to the temple during the opening barrage. He was alive, but he was down, and the radio in the Crest TOC was cycling through 4 call signs with no one at the handset who could run the net. I was in the Heron TOC when it came through. Captain Durrell was at the board. He had 2 qualified controllers on his roster, but one was on a medevac run to Bastion, and one had been evacuated 4 days prior with a knee. He stood in the center of that room and he said, "Who do I have?" And the answer that came back was silence. She was in the doorway. I do not know how long she had been standing there. She had a logbook in one hand from whatever she had been doing in the supply room 20 meters down the corridor. She looked at the board. She looked at Durrell. She said, "Sir, I can run it." Durrell looked at me. I do not know what I looked like in that moment. I think I was trying to remember what her record actually said, and I was coming up empty because I had never thought to read it. He said, "Go." She crossed the room in 4 steps, set the logbook down on the corner of the table and picked up the handset. What came out of her in the next 30 seconds was not what I expected. There was no build-up, no orientation period, no moment of finding her footing. She keyed the radio and she said, all stations, this is Ghost Chalk. I have the net. Stand by for traffic." The room went quiet the way rooms go quiet when something has shifted that cannot be shifted back. On the frequency, one of the pilots came back immediately. He said, "Ghost Chalk Raptor 21 authenticate." She gave him the code without looking it up. He said, "Copy. Good to have you, Ghost Chalk." And then a second aircraft checked in. Then a third. By the time the fourth acknowledged, I was gripping the back of a chair and I did not know why. What she did in the next 11 minutes I can only describe in pieces because I was watching her hands, her face, the board she was updating in real time with a grease pencil while she talked. She had 4 aircraft at 3 different altitudes, 2 of them carrying ordnance and 2 running medevac support, and she was threading them through the same corridor in sequence passes while talking the ground element through the extraction lane. She gave headings in degrees. She gave altitudes in feet. She called the first strike, adjusted the second by 60 meters based on a grid update from the ground, and then she held the medevac bird in a holding pattern at 1,500 feet for 90 seconds while she cleared the LZ of ordnance smoke. She never raised her voice. She never repeated herself. Every transmission was the right length, not one word more than the aircraft needed, not one word less. At the 7-minute mark, the first wave of Marines was on the bird. At 9 minutes, the second wave. At 11 minutes, the ground element confirmed all personnel accounted for 47 men, none left in the kill zone, the medevac corridor clean. She set the handset down on the table. She picked up her logbook. She looked at the board once, checking it, and then she looked at nothing in particular for a moment, not the room, not any of us, and then she picked up the grease pencil and wrote the time of net close in the upper right corner of the board. 14:14. Colonel Vess had come in at the 6-minute mark. I do not know who called him or whether he came on his own. He stood in the back of the room with his cover in his hands, and he listened to the last 5 minutes of the net, heard his 4 aircraft acknowledge Ghost Chalk, heard the extraction complete, heard her call the close. He was a man who had made a decision 11 days ago about who she was and what she was fit for. He was hearing, in real time, exactly what that decision had cost and exactly what it had not been able to touch. When she turned from the board, he was standing 3 feet away. He put his cover on, he squared himself, and he saluted her. She held it a beat just long enough that everyone in the room understood what was happening, and then she returned it. She said, "Sir." He said nothing. There was nothing that fit. She picked up her logbook from the corner of the table, and she walked out of the TOC and back down the corridor toward the supply room, and I listened to her footsteps until I could not hear them anymore. I have been asked in the years since Kale Valley what it was like to be in that room. People want to know about the net, the 4 aircraft, the corridor, the 11 minutes. I tell them it was the most controlled thing I have ever witnessed, and that is true, and it does not come close to answering the question. What I think about is the manifest. 12 lines of fuel allocations and ammunition counts that I carried across a room and set on a table in front of a woman with a 9-minute, 14-asset record and 340 lives attached to her call sign. And I said, "The colonel wants you on supply coord," and I walked away. I was a 22-year man. I knew what a jtac was. I knew what it meant to pull one out of a forward slot mid-deployment. I handed her that paper, and I told myself it was not my decision to make. It wasn't, but I made it anyway just by carrying it across the room. The colonel reassigned her back to the forward TACP slot the following morning. He did it without announcement, without explanation, without ceremony. Her name went back on the board where it belonged. I was in the room when it happened, and I watched his face, and I could not read it, which is perhaps the most honest thing I can say about him, that he corrected what he had done and did not make it about himself. I did not correct anything. I just carried the paper. What I know is this. 47 men came home from a burning LZ because a woman in a rear logistics post heard the net go to pieces and walked into a TOC and picked up a handset. She did not ask for acknowledgement. She did not wait to be invited. She looked at what needed doing and she did it, with a logbook in one hand and 11 days of manifests behind her, and not one word of complaint on her record. Ghost Chalk, That is what 4 pilots called her, and that is what I have called her silently every day since. She never needed me to hand her anything. She had everything she needed before I walked into that room.